For 2 centuries, the samurai were untouchable. 600,000 households sustained by rice, protected by steel. Then, in 1876, the Meiji government handed them a bond worth a fraction of their former lives, and the most feared warrior class in history simply ceased to exist. To understand how debt destroyed them, you first need to understand what rice once meant. Every morning in Edo, the city's narrow streets filled with the sound of wooden clogs and the measured steps of men wearing 2 swords. Behind their lacquered gates, samurai households kept careful records, columns of ink on rice paper, each line a promise of survival. The lifeblood of this world was rice, counted not in bowls or bushels, but in koku, a unit large enough to feed 1 person for a year. 600,000 households depended on these stipends, their names and ranks inscribed in domain ledgers, their income measured in precise increments, 30 koku for a low-ranking retainer, hundreds for a senior official. Once a month, officials distributed rice, or its cash equivalent, the amount meticulously calculated and certified with a seal. Some received sacks of grain, others a handful of coins, always according to rank and years of service. The system was rigid, but for generations it worked. Rice flowed from the paddies to the samurai's table, then onward to pay for school books, medicine, or a daughter's wedding. In Satsuma, a samurai might receive 30 koku, converted at a set rate to 90 ryo in cash. The transaction entered in both the official ledger and the family's own account book. But the weight of these promises was growing too heavy. By the mid-19th century, the government struggled to meet obligations that consumed more than 1/10 of its entire budget. 600,000 households, each expecting their due, became a burden that could not be ignored. The ledgers grew thicker, the payments more strained. Beneath the surface of order and tradition, a quiet tension built, one that would soon force the old world to reckon with the new. The Ministry of Finance faced a problem that numbers alone could not hide. By August 3, 1871, the cost of samurai stipends had swollen to nearly 12% of the national budget, a share that outstripped most other state expenses. The government's promise to 600,000 households had become a liability, draining resources needed for roads, telegraphs, and the new conscript army. The abolition of the domains, Haihan chicken, was not just a political maneuver, it was a fiscal necessity. On August 3, 1871, the Council of State ordered every domain to surrender its land, its ledgers, and its debts. In their place stood prefectures, all answerable to Tokyo, and all required to send their tax revenue to a single treasury. The Ministry of Finance, now the nerve center of the state, took control of an economy that had run on rice and obligation, not cash and contracts. But the old debts remained. The government needed a new source of revenue, one that could be counted and spent. In 1873, the land tax reform swept across the countryside. Every parcel of farmland was surveyed, assessed, and taxed at 3% of its value, payable in yen, not rice. This single act transformed land into a source of cash flow, feeding the treasury with predictable income. By 1874, land tax receipts had more than doubled central revenue, while customs and monopoly taxes filled in the rest. The ministry's ledgers now told a different story. The samurai's share of the budget was unsustainable, and the new cash taxes made it possible to imagine a future without hereditary stipends. The numbers pointed toward a reckoning. The old promises, once written in ink and rice, would soon be rewritten as debt, an obligation the state could finally control. On August 5, 1876, the Ministry of Finance issued the Chitsuroku Shobun Edict, abruptly ending hereditary stipends for former samurai. The government replaced these centuries-old rice payments with kinroku bonds, state securities that formalized the obligation as public debt. The terms were clear: 174 million yen in bonds, each with a 3% annual coupon, with interest paid twice yearly. The principal matched the old stipend ledgers, converting 1 ryo of rice to 1 yen. Redemption was set for 10 years, with early repayment possible after 5 years. These bonds could not be cashed at the Treasury before maturity, but they could be traded on the open market, transferred through banks, or pledged as collateral. For the ministry, this move consolidated a sprawling, unpredictable liability into a single debt, now funded by the new land tax. For former samurai, the edict was a legal notice that their world had changed. The rice stipend became a slip of paper, its value now at the mercy of market forces and government policy. In homes across Japan, the bonds arrived, thin slips of paper stamped with government seals, meant to replace the certainty of rice. For some, these bonds brought only confusion and loss. A former retainer in Satsuma, clutching his certificate, found that merchants in the local market would buy it only at a discount, sometimes 5 or even 10% below its face value. The cash he received barely covered his land tax, let alone his children's schooling or his mother's medicine. Within months, his family pawned heirlooms and cut meals to a single bowl of rice a day. Others, like a senior retainer in Kaga, managed to fare slightly better. The Kaga samurai had petitioned for a higher conversion, and the ministry granted a premium of 1.15 times, producing 12 million yen in bonds for the domain as a whole. Even so, 60% of those bonds were sold at a 5% discount to Osaka's Mitsui Bank. The proceeds allowed some to buy land or invest in small ventures, but for most, the money vanished quickly. The new market for samurai bonds turned old hierarchies upside down. A few adapted, trading skillfully, or finding work in the new prefectural offices. Many more struggled, watching the value of their bonds slip with every transaction, their status eroding alongside their savings. The ledger lines that once promised stability now delivered only uncertainty, and in countless households, the question of what it meant to be samurai was no longer answered by a stipend or a sword. September 1876. The Haitore decree stripped away the last symbol of samurai privilege. Swords, once the mark of a warrior's honor and family pride, were banned from public life. Police patrolled streets, collecting blades that had passed through generations. Some were melted down, others sealed away, their owners' names entered in government ledgers. The katana, for centuries a badge of loyalty and status, became contraband overnight. The loss was more than ceremonial. Samurai, already cut off from stipends and bonds, now watched the final link to their identity vanish. Fathers who had taught their sons the art of swordsmanship saw those same sons hand over their blades to strangers. Petitions arrived in Tokyo, some pleading, some furious. But the answer was unyielding. The sword belonged to the state. Humiliation settled in where pride had lived. The old order dissolved, replaced by the impersonal logic of reform. The pain was not just economic, but existential. A class erased, not by war, but by decree. Resentment gathered in the silence. Kumamoto, October 24, 1876. Before dawn, the city's quiet was shattered as the Shinpurin, a secret society of former samurai, launched their attack. Led by Kato Taku, men who had once been retainers now fought not for a lord, but for a vanished way of life. Their grievances ran deeper than lost stipends or discounted bonds. The sword ban had stripped them of honor, and the conversion of rice incomes to paper bonds had left their families hungry and indebted. In the alleys and armories around Kumamoto Castle, the rebellion flared for hours, rifles seized, swords drawn, government troops answering with modern firepower. 28 rebels died, 12 more were wounded. The uprising failed, but its cause was clear. The old order had not just been defeated, it had been dismantled by new debts. In Kumamoto and across Japan, anger over economic loss now turned into open revolt. February 1877. Saigo Takamori led Satsuma's former samurai into open revolt, banners raised against a government that had stripped them of stipends and swords. Facing 45,000 conscripted soldiers armed with rifles and artillery, the samurai fought from Kumamoto to Shiroyama, refusing surrender even as defeat closed in. On September 24, the last stand ended in silence. Saigo fell, and with him, the old order. The government's victory was absolute. 10 million yen, nearly a third of the national budget, flowed into the army and new railways. The samurai's debts were paid off, their bonds dissolved, and their place in society erased. The Satsuma Rebellion sealed the fate of a class, redirecting Japan's future. Modernization dismantles more than armies. It rewrites the rules of survival. Today, economies still erase identities in the name of progress, leaving the human cost in their wake. Sometimes an empire does not fall. It reinvents itself by destroying its past. Share your thoughts on legacy and change below.